What I'd like to talk about now is the final aspect of the end-of-life care project, which we've called the Business Intelligence Dashboard, which presents summary data of practices across the CCG who have signed up for the clinical dashboard. And it presents comparative data in aggregated form. So no patient identifiable information is here, but it does name practices and enables each of us to benchmark ourselves against our colleagues across the CCG. As with the clinical end-of-life care dashboard, this is something that you need to contact the CCG, who will arrange for you to sign up for the data sharing agreement needed for the clinical dashboard, and then will also give you, associated with that, access to the Business Intelligence Dashboard. So let me talk us through then the end-of-life care dashboard for, in this case, my GP practice. So the fourth aspect of the end-of-life care data sharing project is the Business Intelligence Dashboard. There's a separate video about the practice dashboard and a further video concerning the template and the summary view that is presented to out of hours and other services. This Business Intelligence Dashboard is a summary of data, anonymized, aggregated and presented by practice, that allows practices to compare with others in the CCG who have signed up to the data processing agreement. This is my practice, so I won't go through the numbers here because they're more interestingly presented in graphs in just a moment. You can select here. At the moment, this is all practices in the CCG, but you can select by neighbourhood community nursing teams if that would be helpful for you. The thing that I think most people will find of value is these comparisons graphs, which present 5 or 6 key process measures for good end-of-life care and enables my practice to compare itself with others across the CCG. This is the first one. So this is percentage of patients in my practice who died in the last 2 years who were on the practice end-of-life care register before they died. Now, national data would suggest that at about 30% of deaths are really not predictable, so an absolute maximum would be around 70%. The CCG mean here is around 40, that's actually 36%, and you can see there's quite a distribution across the CCG, and I'm trying to find, this is my practice here. If you hover over any one of these columns, you'll see there are 196 patients who've died in the last 2 years. And in my particular practice, we were just shy of 50%. This is dependent on 2 things. Firstly, that an end-of-life care template, at least some of its components have been completed. And secondly, that your practice has registered with the CCG for the data processing agreement. But it's helpful to see the distribution there. The second variable is just talking about patients who are alive on practice registers, who are Gold Standards Framework Red or Amber, and who have just-in-case medications issued. Now, in an ideal world, it could be argued that that should be 100%. There are 3 practices that have achieved 100%, but if you hover over this, in fact, in this particular practice, there was just 1 patient who is GSF Red or Amber, and that particular patient does have just-in-case meds in place. In my practice at the moment, there are 8 patients GSF Red or Amber, and just over 70% have just-in-case meds in place. CCG average is just over 20%, And you can see that there's quite a number of practices down here where there are no data entered. The probable explanation is that this read code has not been entered into the template. An alternative explanation is that just in case meds indeed aren't in place. The important thing is that that means that for these practices, that information in terms of whether or not just in case meds are in place will not be available to out-of-hours services through the summary view. This becomes really important when we come down to CPR status. So these are live patients on the end-of-life care register. Is it recorded whether or not they are for CPR? And ideally, as close to 100% as possible would be the target. The CCG average is just over 40%, and there are a number of practices down here in whom the percentages are very low. Really important that this information is recorded on the record, because otherwise the ambulance crews, if they're called, simply won't know the CPR status of the patient. Third metric is live patients on the end-of-life care register in whom whether the patient is aware of prognosis has been recorded or not. Big spread, CCG average just over 20%. Again, very helpful out of hours to know whether or not this patient you are seeing is aware of their prognosis. Next metric is percentage of patients on the register currently alive who have a gold standards framework status, red, amber or green. CCG mean about 60%, but again a considerable spread. And then the last one, which is quite thought-provoking, is of all the patients on your end-of-life care register in your practice, how many of them have a non-cancer diagnosis? In the CCG, the mean is just under 30%, although we know that 70% of deaths in our CCG are from non-malignant disease. It's understood, of course, that recognition of end-of-life care can be more challenging, but some practices may be related in part to practice demographics, have a fair proportion of their patients recognised to be approaching the end of life with non-malignant disease. Other practices, it is far fewer. So that might be food for thought as you reflect where your practice stands in relation to others and indeed the CCG mean of to what extent when we think as a practice team about end-of-life care, are we just thinking cancer rather than non-cancer? So these are comparator metrics, no patient identifiable information. There is practice name identified on this dashboard in order to encourage comparison and consideration that some of these practices have very particular demographics that might explain some of the variation. So that's for reflection, for thought, and for consideration of are there ways that we might be able to get our practice further up towards the left. These are designed in terms of left is best. To get access to this business intelligence dashboard, please contact the CCG, who will arrange the data processing agreement with you and then login and password access to the business intelligence dashboard.